The Green Tide, Orcs, greenskins. They are known by many names, but they all mean the same thing. The violent green-skinned menace that live only for war and will search for a fight wherever they might go. Whether that be the dwarf strongholds to the east of the Old World, or across 1,000 planets in the 41st millennium. Regardless of whether they come rampaging from the Old World or from some distant point beyond the stars, the greenskins should never be taken for granted, for these brutal savages are exceedingly simple in both mind and action, and ultimately, that's why they pose a significant threat to all civilizations around them. In this exploratory video, we will learn about the Orcs that inhabit the Warhammer Fantasy world, and the Orcs that plague the galaxy in the 41st millennium. There are more similarities between the greenskins in both universes than one may initially think, but there are also many differences that set them apart. One thing is for sure, though. They live for violence and war. The Orcs of Warhammer Fantasy are a primitive and warlike race that scourges the face of the Old World. They are the bane of all civilization, and they care nothing for order, progress, or keeping records of their feats and conquests. These creatures have hides of green hue and are hideous in appearance. They are taller and broader than a man, but stooped like an ape of the Southlands. Their red and beady eyes are set deep beneath a thick brow. They glow red in the dark, and their foul fangs protrude from their gaping mouths. They converse among themselves as much by blows and cuffs as by guttural sounds and grunts. Their weapons and artifacts are of the crudest kind, yet effective enough to break havoc in every land they migrate to. In the early days after the Great Catastrophe, a cataclysmic event that shook mountains and opened the earth itself, numberless orcs emerged from the caves beneath the World's Edge Mountains, and from the east storming into the more developed and civilized lands of the Old World.
From the deepest, darkest tunnels it came, burrowing and banging, shouting and smashing. We soon learned not to try to negotiate, save with axes and cannon.
The green tide of mindless destruction almost annihilated the race of man, as well as put the ancient and proud dwarves on the brink of extinction. Attacking from above and below, the greenskins surged through the broken battlements of their once mighty holds and killed all in their path. Dwarf holds were taken, human settlements were burned, and the armies sent against the vast green hordes were hacked apart. It was seemingly the end of civilization. But after the coming of Sigmar Heldenhammer and the ensuing unification of the tribes of men, the Orcs were defeated in the legendary battle of Blackfire Pass. The Orcs and Goblins were ultimately beaten, and they entered an age of stagnation, while the races of dwarves and men would go on to recover and develop gunpowder and even great war machines of devastating power. On the other side, the Orcs still rely upon their iron cleavers, they usually call choppers, and still throw themselves headlong at the enemy, slowly recovering year after year and growing in numbers once again. Since then, the race of man, whose physical strength pales in comparison to the hulking greenskins, has suffered at the hands of these savage and violent warriors. the fine swords of men forever clashing against the heavy iron cleavers used by the greenskins. There is no counting the numbers of the orcs and goblins which infest the barren places of the world, and no matter how many are slain, there are always more. One would be wrong to underestimate the threat of the orcs, for when they form a horde led by a mighty war boss who is inspired by his idols, they can become unstoppable and will cut a swath through the realms of men and dwarves. Even wonderful and mighty elven cities have been laid low, and many fine things have been overthrown and trodden into dust by the greenskins.
I fired the heavy bolter for so long that the barrel melted. The mortars ran after an hour, and the last frag missile was loosed not long after. We fired enough to kill thousands, but they just didn't stop. And they laughed the whole time.
Similarly, the orcs from Warhammer 40k charge against their enemies in a furious desire for blood and violence. The orcs live only for war. They thrive on battle and mayhem. As they run screaming towards the enemy, they fire their rusty weapons with erratic aim. The ground shakes and the air fills with dark smoke and savage war cries, all accompanied by the loud snarling of rusty yet powerful engines as the orcs close in. As they quickly cover ground, the orcs care little for their own safety and that of their fellows. Eager to get into the thickest of fights, they storm forward, blasting and crushing everything in the way, leaving a red path of destruction in their wake. But the true nature of the greenskins is unveiled when they reach the enemy lines and close combat begins. The brutality they unleash upon their foes is unparalleled. Choppers swing up and down, hitting the enemy infantry who oftentimes cannot do more than defend themselves against the living avalanche of green creatures coming at them. The ferocious orcs scream and laugh as they hack and slash, thriving in the excitement of a proper battle. They live for this moment. The orc physiology is so resilient that in the heat of battle, they ignore wounds that would kill a normal man. The orcs have been known to survive fatal wounds, and it is said that they grow and develop the more they fight. Gunshot wounds, broken bones, or burned limbs are no reason for an orc to turn away a good scrap. In the brutal anarchy of the action, they do not slow down in their joyful fury. The wounds they suffer and the scars that form thereafter are a testament to the mightiness and resilience of an orc. The mighty warlords that lead these greenskins across thousands of battlefields are oftentimes the biggest and strongest of them all. They conquer vast numbers of lesser tribes, and with time, they amass so many followers that they can even escalate into a devastating war. A gathering of orcs of epic proportions that move from star system to star system, drowning entire planets in wave after wave of greenskins. Wars are generally named after the war boss that managed to gather all the orc war bands. It is part military campaign and part migration of gigantic proportions at the same time. Millions upon millions of battle-hungry orcs stop fighting amongst themselves, at least to a degree, in order to invade their target and stop everything in their way. As long as there is something bigger to fight and a proper battle to be had, a war will continue moving, leaving only cities burned, armies crushed, and entire planets annihilated. Such is the potentially devastating force of a sizable orc war, that there are many Imperial commanders who will simply attempt to resolve their conflicts with the numberless greenskins with an orbital bombardment, if not an all-out exterminatus, in the most extreme of cases. There are some, however, who believe that the Orcs do not wage eternal war so as to subjugate all of the races to their will, claiming that the greenskins have no desire for such. Instead, the mayhem and violence of battle is its own reward, and war is little more than the greatest game that was ever conceived.
Of all the races I have battled throughout the galaxy, the Orc is the hardest to comprehend. They wage war with machines that should not work, care little for strategic gains, and are just as likely to slaughter each other as the enemy. How does one battle an enemy that defies all logic?
Fortunately for the races of men, dwarves, elves, and more, the thing that makes the greenskins such a great threat to the civilized kingdoms and systems and their planets is also the very thing which keeps them at bay. For the greenskins, regardless of whether they torment the lands of the old world or the many systems of the Imperium, their endless thirst for violence means they are in a constant state of civil war, fighting amongst themselves when they have no one else to fight, and sometimes even when they do. As long as there are battles to be had, the greenskins will continue to fight, spreading their reach until they are defeated, or at last they drown all in an endless tide of violence. The origins of the Orcs of the Old World are shrouded in mystery. No one knows from where they truly came. Many believe their spores arrived entirely by accident when the Old Ones first landed on the planet, and from there the Orcs established themselves in the Far East, beyond the World's Edge Mountains. However, after the Great Cataclysm, they migrated further west, attacking the dwarf strongholds across the mountains and pushing them to the brink of extinction, spreading their spores as they went. The Orcs of the 41st millennium, though, have a better established origin, dating back to the War in Heaven. The Old Ones, struggling to level the playing field between themselves and their Necron enemies, created the Orcs, the forebears of the modern-day Orc. Much larger, and indeed much smarter, the Orcs were a military force of immense power, but over the vast eons of time, the Orcs devolved, losing their intelligence and size, and becoming the simple-minded barbarians they are today. There is also very little difference in the nature that fantasy Orcs and the Orcs of the far future reproduce, as both are a fungus-animal hybrid, rebuilding their numbers not through standard reproduction, but through the spreading of spores which grow in dark, dank places into fully fledged and violent green-skinned warriors. It is considered that the best and most effective way of destroying, or at least temporarily stopping a greenskin menace, is to use fire to cleanse it all into ashes, so that the spores of these creatures cannot gain the necessary nutrients to develop. The Orcs are known to thrive on pure force of will alone when it comes to the powers that go beyond the physical plane. Their collective might is made powerful by the sheer amount of numbers believing in this invisible power. The greenskins use their own psychic power and do not draw from the warp as psykers from other races usually do. The Orcs of the 41st millennium have somehow advanced this ability to a larger scope. If enough Orcs believe a thing to be true, then it is invariably the case. All Orcs know that if you paint a speeder red, it will go faster, and so it does. All Orcs know painting a bomb in yellow makes it more powerful, and so yellow bombs make for bigger explosions when detonated. Scholars and commanders across the Imperium of Man cannot explain how these things are possible, but they are. Enough orcs believing something works is enough to make anything work. The orc race's collective unconsciousness registers in the immaterium, the same as all the other races do. They create an echo that ultimately forms into the forms of Gork and Mork, the two entities all greenskins worship as their own gods. All know that Gork is brutal but cunning, while Mork is cunning but brutal. Mork represents the cunning of the greenskin race. He is the patron of creators, shamans, and usually the most intelligent breed of orcs. Mech boys, weird boys, and basically the ones that do a bit more than fighting. These are the ones who keep the hordes of greenskins moving effectively from battle to battle. Gork represents the brutality of the greenskin race. He is the patron of those orcs that live to smash, break, chop, and kill their enemies with their ferociousness and strength. This basically includes all orcs, but it does not ultimately matter which god an orc acclaims, since both are warrior gods and will favor the orcs in ultimately the same goal: to live for the thrill of the fight. All greenskins follow the same basic societal blueprint. Both variants exist in tribal societies, and even though they have wildly different cultural values, they are always ruled by the simplest hierarchy there is. The bigger, the better, with the bigger greenskins invariably rising up the ranks to become imposing war bosses and leading their own war bands and tribes from one battle to the next. In the old world, the encampments of the orcs are squalid in the extreme, and every so often, the different tribes gather together and migrate in great hordes across the land, waging war against anyone they come across, and very often amongst themselves. There is no crime in greenskin tribes, mostly because there are no laws, save that the biggest and mightiest orc around them is the boss. While most other races will have some form of currency and economy, the greenskins use teeth as currency. This means that any greenskin can produce his own means of exchange at any time by pulling the teeth of his hunted prey, or even his own, with human teeth being of little value, while the teeth of an elf is highly cherished. In the case of the orcs that roam the far future, tyrannid teeth are extremely desirable for them. Although a greenskin can always pull his own teeth, which can grow back rapidly and indefinitely if he is in desperate need for it, they are valued less by their fellow greenskins. This system often means that the biggest and strongest greenskins are often the richest and best equipped with weapons and armor, since they can either pull their own teeth or knock out the teeth of a weaker greenskin and simply take his. However, there is no severe inflation in the greenskin economy, for teeth will rapidly break down, keeping the economy somehow balanced. The greenskins' armies of the fantasy world come with snotlings, goblins, common orcs, big uns, and ranking above them all is the failed experiment of the Chaos Dwarves, the Black Orcs. Always the biggest and smartest of the warband they may be a part of. We have an entire episode dedicated to the Black Orcs here on the channel. You can check it out after this video to learn more about the meanest greenskins there are in existence and how they came to be. On the other hand, the savage orcs of the old world are considered brutal feral primitives, even by low orcish standards. These brutes have shunned the practice of wearing armor, and will rush into the heart of the battle wearing furs and pelts decorated with bones and skulls, all while swinging their basic spears and clubs with devastating force. Although none can doubt that these monstrous brutes have even fewer wits than their fellow greenskins, they more than make up for it with their sheer ferocity and strength. The orcs rampaging across the galaxy are much more apt to use their shooters rather than their choppers when charging the enemy. In fact, the Orcs have a much wider array of tools at their disposal when it comes to prosecuting a battle against whichever foe they face, thanks to the machinations of the mech boys, who show more than the usual basic understanding of building, jury-rigging, and bodging. These Orcs can deploy airstrikes and loose huge mechanical monsters known as gargants upon the enemy to destroy them. These are Orcs who can baffle even the most knowledgeable of Mechanicus by being able to create a massive variety of weapons, vehicles, and machines seemingly out of scrap, making machines work when they simply shouldn't, at least not by conventional means. In contrast to these Orcs are the freebooters of the 41st millennium. These warbands are often Orcs drawn from various clans who have either chosen to leave or have been exiled, but they hold no allegiance to anyone or anything. They lack so much in loyalty that the freebooters can be found offering mercenary work, assisting any Orc clan or opposing any other if the price is right. They can be often found roaming the vast celestial oceans of the galaxy, acting as little more than giant green pirates.
Everything in this part of space belongs to the Orcs. Full speed! One lone Orc left to steal their loot, wishing it had turned out so. Through big shot teeth saying I should have let the pilot go.
There are even pain boys, the greenskin equivalent to doctors or healers. They are only employed to heal the gravest of injuries. Pain boys often experiment with their orc patients, usually having arms, legs, and even heads swapped between them, taking advantage of the extremely resilient form of the orcs. These are able to survive terrible injuries and even come out stronger and enhanced, thanks to the crazy works of the Pain Boys. The Pain Boys learn their craft through a mixture of instinct, trial, and error, and they keep experimenting with joy upon their patients. The Mega Knobs are the richest and most battle-hardened orc knobs around, clad in mech-built mega armor, with enough protective plating to turn the wearer into a walking tank. These battle-hardened orcs can shrug off a hail of bullets that would kill lesser greenskins. It is said that even a direct hit from a tank round is unlikely to do more than knock a mega knob over. They spearhead the brutal attacks that lay down the many armies arrayed against them. There are many types of orcs, subspecies of greenskins, and even other creatures that form a greenskin horde. When united to attack, they can be an unstoppable force. In both Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k, they are a serious threat to the existence of mankind and all civilizations. If it were not for their own flaws, the entire galaxy would be submerged in a green tide of violence. The Orcs would surely be the dominant military force, if not the dominant life form of their respective settings, whether they believe that war is simply a game no one else is playing or not. As long as there are battles to be had, the Orcs will roam the lands as an ever-present menace that grows with each passing day. Failure is not a thing known to the Orcs. If they cannot conquer or destroy on the first try, there can be only one thing to do. Try again. Wave after wave of greenskins, army after army, they will keep coming. They will come crashing into the most stubborn line of defense, and they will eventually break it. For these are the Orcs, and they are without number.
Hell's Reach, this is the Crusader. We are breaking from the planet. The orbital war is lost. Repeat, the orbital war is lost. Grimaldus, once you hear these words, stand ready. You are Mordred's heir, and my trust rides with you. Hell is coming, brother. The great enemy's fleet is without number. But faith and fury will see your duty done. Grimaldus, die well.
On this channel, we are putting together narrative Total War cinematic battles and Warhammer lore videos. A special thank you goes to our Patreon supporters who help us in the making of more content. You can also join Patreon and earn extra perks while supporting the videos to come. Find the link in the description below. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.